Thank you very much. I have a strange thing to start off with. And actually, this speech is probably going to raise some eyebrows. And actually, truth be told, if I'd heard this talk 10 years ago, my eyebrows would have been raised as well. However, here it goes. The most life-changing lesson I have ever received was given to me by a hamster. Okay, right, let me explain. Growing up, I didn't really spend any time with animals. My family didn't have any dogs, cats, rabbits, gerbils, guinea pigs. And actually, it's kind of sad and morbid to say, but the closest I ever came to an animal really was when they were digesting in my stomach. Needless to say, I didn't ever really form a connection with an animal. I never got to know one as an individual. However, that all changed for me when I was 19 years old and got Rupert the hamster. Now, Rupert, as you can probably imagine, was a lovely little animal. He used to sit in the palm of my hand and eat broccoli, because broccoli was Rupert the hamster's favorite food. Oh my goodness. If you gave him broccoli, he was the happiest hamster who had ever lived. But kale, didn't like kale so much. If I gave him kale, he would look at me and he'd go, "Really? Where's the broccoli?" Right? However, I have to be honest, Rupert didn't actually meet my expectations. You see, when I got Rupert, I did what any responsible hamster owner would. I got him a wheel, because if there's one thing we know about hamsters, they love running in their wheels. Except I couldn't verify that, because Rupert was alive for over 3 years, which is good for a hamster. I saw him use his wheel about 3 times, right? Concerned for his cardiovascular well-being and health, I bought him a transparent ball. I thought, well, hang on a minute, maybe it was a scenery issue. The wheel's a bit visually unstimulating, right? But a transparent ball on the floor of my apartment, now we're talking. Except every time I put him in the ball, he would plotter around a little bit, take the food from his cheeks, eat it, and go to sleep. My goodness, Rupert the hamster was the laziest hamster. And I don't say that to shame him, because truth be told, I do not use a treadmill anywhere near as much as I should. But the reason I say this is to emphasize that Rupert didn't do things that I assumed that he would, simply because he was a hamster. Now, I could have gone to the same pet store, bought a different hamster, brought that hamster home, called that hamster Rupert, and that Rupert the hamster might have loved running in his wheel, might have loved kale, but not been so fussed for broccoli. But my Rupert was different. You see, Rupert the hamster was a unique individual with a personality. He had likes and dislikes. He made decisions based on his subjective desires and tastes. Hang on a minute. What's the lesson here? Right? We know that the animals we love in our homes have personalities and do things they enjoy. So what exactly did Rupert teach me? Simply put, he taught me that the way that I had viewed animals was wrong. And he humbled me to the realization that the perception I had towards animals was unsubstantiated and actually had serious consequences. You see, the thing is, the way that we view animals is confusing and ultimately very contradictory. The animals we love in our homes, we recognize as individuals with personalities, individuals whose lives have moral value and who should be protected ethically and legally. But then there is an issue here, which is that we don't apply this logic consistently. This moral framework is not applied consistently because there are other animals who we don't tend to talk about. Of course, I'm referring to farmed animals. These animals we refer to as if they are abstractions. What I mean by that is we view them as simply all being the same. We don't think about them as being individuals with idiosyncratic behaviors. Instead, we view them as being kind of ubiquitously similar with little to no variation in character or personality. Before I used the phrase serious consequences, what I was alluding to when I stated that was the fact that we kill over 80 or 85 billion land animals every single year for food. And as many as 2.3 trillion fish are pulled from our oceans for food as well. Just think about those numbers for a moment. 2.3 trillion. These numbers are so huge that they're incomprehensible. And isn't that kind of the problem here? When we think of these numbers, it becomes more of an intellectual exercise rather than an emotional one. These numbers are so huge, it's basically impossible to recognize the complications or consequences of what these numbers are actually representing. I mean, what does 85 billion land animals or 2.3 trillion marine animals look like stacked up in front of us? The problem is, how do we empathize with abstract numbers that are simply too large for us to think about in these ways? But the truth is, behind these numbers is something that we don't often consider. Because we're not simply talking about numbers here. We're talking about individuals. And for each and every one of the animals who forms these numbers that we're talking about, each and every one of them is an individual, a someone. Now, we don't often think about the animals who we farm as being a someone. But if they're not a someone, then what are they? I mean, they're not a something. They're not inanimate objects like the chairs that you're all sat on. They are sentient, feeling, conscious individuals. Every pig, cow, fish, lamb, chicken, a someone. The problem is when we refer to animals as livestock or as a thing or as an it, we are reinforcing to ourselves that they are mere commodities. We objectify animals to make what we do to them seem morally permissible. But the truth is, it's not morally permissible. And look, I don't say that believing it to be a contentious statement, because each and every one of us in this room says that we're against animal cruelty, yet we support industries that cause more suffering and are more cruel to animals than any other that exist on this planet. For example, someone kicking an animal we don't believe to be moral. We say that people who kick animals are doing an immoral thing. But the animals who we farm wish the worst they had to fear was being kicked. I mean, if kicking an animal is morally wrong, then how can forcibly impregnating them, taking their babies away from them, mutilating them, forcing them into gas chambers and cutting their throat not also be wrong if we recognize that ultimately the action of kicking an animal is wrong because of the harm that it causes to these animals? Now, these comparisons are important because in the same way that kicking an animal is an unnecessary act of violence, also too is the farming and slaughtering of animals. We don't force animals into gas chambers or butcher them with a sense of reluctance and remorse. We gorge on their flesh and secretions for enjoyment and for pleasure. The suffering of these animals is merely a means to an end. That end is a momentary, fleeting passage of pleasure. A 15-minute meal that we consume and then forget about. A sentient life reduced to a transient moment of taste bud stimulation. The only thing that's left of animals once we've slaughtered them, butchered them, rendered them down, consumed them, and then excreted them are the plastic ear tags that we've stapled through their ears as a means of identification. A sentient individual reduced to a number, a barcode on an ear to symbolize their status as an object. We have subjugated these animals to such an extent that even the word subjugated seems extreme when applied to the plight of these farmed animals. Just think about that for a moment. These words seem like they are over the top, extreme, because of the way that we have devalued these animals to such an extent that we believe that what we do to them shouldn't even be considered as a problem. I mean, often people say to me, look, Ed, the thing is they're only chickens, they're only cows, they're only pigs. The thing you have to realize is that we're humans and these animals are beneath us. I mean, for example, can an animal conceptualize the wonders of the universe? Can an animal write a symphony? And quite clearly the answer to those things is no. But then, are those the basic requirements necessary for an animal to be granted basic compassion and consideration? Clearly, again, no. Hence why if my story about Rupert the hamster is finished with me macerating him alive, which is what happens to every male chick born into the egg industry, you would have thought that to be a terrible thing, a reprehensible thing. Maybe some of you would have left the room in disgust at this cruel thing that I had done to an animal in this moment. Needless to say, Rupert knew not of the stars in the night sky, or of the musical talent required to produce a symphony. But no one in this room would argue that he needed to in order to not be harmed by a human. Now, the thing is, animals are also capable of doing things that we humans are unable to do. Who here has a sense of smell as complex as that of a cow, who it is believed can smell scents as far as 6 miles away? They have this complex sense because it's supposed to help protect them, show them when there's danger so they can avoid the threat. But what if they have no means of protection? What if they are unable to escape the danger? What does a slaughterhouse smell like to a mother cow who is crammed in a truck, being driven to her death. Each moment that passes, the smell gets stronger and stronger as she is taken closer and closer to the knife that's going to be pulled across her throat. One of the things that sticks with you about a slaughterhouse is the smell. It is putrid. It saturates your clothing, your hair. It is the stench of blood, festering guts and organs, the smell of fear, death and suffering. Now, we recognize that animals are able to hear more complexly, see more complexly, taste more complexly, smell more complexly. Is it not also possible that they can feel and experience things maybe like pain more complexly than we can? Now, look, we don't know, do we? But that's kind of the point. We don't know. We don't know how the sensation of pain and fear feels like to a pig compared to ourselves. But what we do know is these animals experience pain and fear. What more do we need? What more do we need to know to recognize that what we're doing we should stop? What else would it take for us to recognize that this needless violence should come to an end? Because it is violence and it is needless. None of these things need to happen to animals. But when they do, we know that what we are doing to them is causing them harm and suffering. Now, animals are like us in many ways. They fight to protect their children and their families. They mourn and grieve. They value safety, comfort, and compassion. But let's not make any mistake. Humans and non-human animals are different in so many ways as well. And one of those primary differences is, of course, our intellect. We are, of course, cognitively more advanced and intellectually more capable than the other animals who share this planet with us. But why then do we continue to perpetuate an illogical and irrational system which goes against the values that we say that we have? How can we talk of kindness and compassion whilst denying such things to species of animals who deserve them just as much as the species who we grant them to? If eating animal products is a choice, then why would we choose to be cruel? I think it speaks to something being deeply wrong when the idea of granting compassion consistently towards animals is viewed as an extreme position to take. Now, non-human animals, especially the ones who we farm, are of course more vulnerable and weaker than we are. But does that provide us a justification to impose our dominance onto them? I mean, ironically, we view those who have power as being tyrants and maniacal when they exploit their power to subjugate and harm those who are more vulnerable and defenseless than they are. And we actually do apply this standard to certain species of animals as well. It's precisely one of the reasons why we view those who abuse dogs and cats as doing something so reprehensible. It's because of that power imbalance that exists between the oppressor and between the victim in those situations. So why then don't we apply this standard consistently? Why, when it comes to the animals who we consume, do we believe that our physical and intellectual supremacy grants us the right to so frivolously and nonchalantly cause so much suffering and harm to animals who I would strongly argue deserve protection from us as well? Now, Rupert the hamster told me, or taught me, that what I did to animals was illogical. But more than that, my belief that his life had value and that he deserved compassion and respect exposed a glaring hypocrisy in my own life. The hypocrisy of why love one but eat the other. No, I'm not trying to convince you that non-human animals are the same as us, because clearly they're not. Clearly we're very different, and actually often the differences of non-human animals are remarkable, worthy of admiration and awe. Non-human animals don't deserve moral consideration from us because they're like us. They deserve moral consideration because of who they are themselves, who they are as individuals. Importantly, I'm not trying to convince you of something that you don't already believe. Each and every one of us in this room believes that a world that seeks to reduce suffering and harm is preferable to a world that maximizes such things. And this is all that veganism is. It is simply an extension of the values that we all have. It is the consistent actualization of the values that we believe that we should have towards animals. It is simply recognizing that if dogs, cats, and indeed hamsters have moral worth that makes things like slaughtering them immoral, then to be consistent, the same must also be true for the animals who we sadly, as a society, still pay to have slaughtered on our behalf. I want to end with one final rhetorical question. I don't think anyone in this room would argue that what we have now is the ideal situation. If we all had a blank canvas and we could draw a food system for tomorrow, is this what we would draw? I would imagine not. So let me present to you a blank canvas. And on this canvas, I'm going to draw you a different food system. This is a food system that has been shown by the United Nations and the world's other leading environmental organizations to be the most sustainable one available to us. It's also a food system that would remove the biggest user of antibiotics globally and remove the biggest driver of antibiotic resistance globally. It's also a food system that would remove the biggest drivers in the emergence of bird and swine flu viruses that could cause the next pandemic. And also, it is a food system that would remove the biggest cause of animal suffering, harm, and death that we all, as a species, currently contribute towards. Would you accept this version of a food system that I'm offering to you right now? Because if you would, then it might just be that Rupert the hamster has taught you a life-changing lesson too. Thank you so much for listening.